Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to give you a genuine shortcut to achieving more success with, well, a lot less stress.
hmm
And we're going to do that by cracking the code on a principle so fundamental that once you truly absorb it, your approach to work, business, and even your personal life will shift completely.
And it really does govern everything. I mean, from how many socks you actually wear from your drawer to these huge world-changing economic trends.
Exactly. We're talking about the 80-20 rule. You've probably heard of it as the Pareto principle.
And the core insight we really need to synthesize for you is that the path to, exponential success, it doesn't lie in working harder. It's not about managing every single minute of your day.
Yeah.
It lies in recognizing and then leveraging a fundamental statistical law, a predictable imbalance that exists between inputs and outputs.
And this is where the deep dive gets really interesting, because the 80-20 principle runs completely counter to, well, our intuition.
It really does.
We are conditioned by society, by school, by our democratic ideals even, to believe in what we're going to call the 50-50 fallacy.
That fallacy is just.
Yeah.
It's this deeply rooted, almost charmingly naive belief that effort should be proportional to results.
Yeah. You get out what you put in.
Exactly. You put in 50% of the work, you expect roughly 50% of the payoff, you expect every customer to be more or less equally valuable.
Or every product in your lineup to contribute its fair share to the bottom line.
Or that every hour you spend at your desk is equally productive.
But if that were true, productivity would be simple. And the world is. Well, it's anything but simple.
The 80-20 principle asserts the opposite. It says there's an inbuilt, predictable, and frankly measurable imbalance between those inputs and outputs.
Right. So what are the numbers?
Well, as a starting point, and this is important, it's a benchmark, a convenient metaphor. Roughly 80% of the consequences, the results, the value, it's all going to come from just 20% of the causes or your efforts or your inputs.
And once you embrace that truth,
the whole game changes. You start burning all that energy on what we call the trivial many, that vast, unproductive 80%, and you start concentrating your finite time and your resources solely on the vital few.
the game-changing 20%.
That's it.
So, our mission today is threefold. First, we're going to unpack the bizarre history of this idea, which starts with an economist and, believe it or not, his pea plants.
It's a great story.
Second, we'll move into some rigorous 80-20 analysis. We'll show you exactly how businesses apply this to generate explosive profit.
And finally, we'll translate all of that into a kind of philosophical guide, a form of 80-20 thinking for high-impact decision-making in your career and, your daily life.
Let's unpack this core principle of imbalance. So the journey to understanding modern efficiency, it doesn't start in a factory or a boardroom.
No.
It starts, bizarrely, in 19th century Italy with an economist and sociologist who also just happened to be a part-time farmer, Vilfredo Pareto.
Right. And Pareto's observations, which began around 1896, were truly stunning, mostly because of their consistency across just wildly different scales of complexity.
So what was his first big discovery?
It was societal. He was looking at wealth distribution, and he found that in Italy, 80% of the land was owned by just 20% of the population.
Okay, so a massive concentration of resources.
Huge concentration. And that initial finding was purely focused on that, on national resources and wealth.
That's a massive insight on its own, but what really solidifies the principle, for me at least, is the second domain he observed, which was, it was utterly mundane.
It was his garden.
His garden.
That's right. When studying his own horticulture, he observed that just 20% of his pea plants, they were responsible for producing 80% of the healthy pods, the fruit that he harvested.
So the other 80% of the plants.
They contributed a meager 20% to the yield. So it didn't matter if he was looking at these massive societal data points on property or
a handful of legumes in his backyard.
Exactly. This profound, disproportionate relationship just kept emerging again and again.
And that's the power of the concept, right? It wasn't a specific theory about capitalism or, farming. It was an observation of a mathematical pattern that just underlies success.
But for decades, it really remained an academic footnote. It took a management consultant to transform it into the bedrock of modern efficiency.
And who was that?
That transformation came courtesy of Joseph Juran, a Romanian-born U.S. engineer after World War II. Juran was working in quality control and manufacturing, and he took Pareto's observation and he basically weaponized it for business.
So how did that work in practice? I mean, in a post-war industrial context?
Well, Juran observed that 80% of the defects, The flaws, the failures in manufactured products, were almost always caused by only 20% of the possible production errors.
Okay, so think about a complex assembly line with, I don't know, 100 potential failure points.
100 points, right. And Duran's insight meant you didn't need to fix all 100 points at the same time. You just needed to identify the critical 20 points that were causing 80% of your headaches.
So by concentrating resources on fixing those critical few, that 20% quality could be improved radically and fast.
And Duran formalized this. He applied the name Pareto principle, and crucially, he called the high-impact causes the rule of the vital few.
The vital few. I like that.
The naming is key because it gives us a clear mental map. The challenge is reframed from how do I solve everything to how do I identify the few things that matter most.
And then at the same time, how do I ignore the rest?
Exactly, which he termed the trivial many.
Okay, before we get into applications, we have to clarify the math. I think this is where the common understanding often trips people up.
Absolutely.
While we say 80-20 rule, you stressed earlier that it's a benchmark or a metaphor. It's not a rigid law where the numbers have to add up to 100.
Let's really hammer this point home. The underlying reality is a statistical pattern called a power law distribution. All that means is it's characterized by radical imbalance. A few items at the top of any distribution will have exponentially more influence or weight than the huge number of items at the bottom.
So the relationship might be 70-30?
Right. 70% of results from 30% of causes.
Or it could be really extreme, like 955.
Or even 99.90.1 in some of these winner-take-all markets we see today. What's fundamental is not that the numbers add up to 100, it's that the distribution is uneven.
That is the critical insight.
Yeah. If 80% of the world's energy is consumed by 15% of the world's population, that's an 80-15 relationship, but it powerfully illustrates that concentration of impact.
And that dangerous assumption, that 50-50 fallacy we mentioned, that's the mental map that causes the most grief.
It is. We are biologically and socially wired to expect a democratic balance distribution. But when you analyze real-world data, the most likely result is a profound imbalance, often far greater than you could imagine.
And this pattern showed up everywhere, even before Duran formalized it. You mentioned George Ziff earlier, a contemporary academic who found this pattern in everything from language to romance.
Zipp's research in the 1930s is a wonderful testament to the universality of this. His analysis of philology, the study of language, showed a small core vocabulary accounted for the vast majority of all communication.
And what about the marriage licenses?
Right. More relatable still, he analyzed Philadelphia marriage licenses back in 1931. He found that 70% of marriages occurred between people living within just 30% of the maximum recorded distance between partners.
So it applies to how often we use a word, how far we travel for love, and even how we use our household items. Just to make this concept hyper-tangible for you, the listener, think about your kitchen tools. You probably own dozens of knives and gadgets, right?
Of course.
But 20% of those tools are used 80% of the time. It's always the same spatula or the same coffee maker.
Or look inside your closet. If you were really honest with yourself, you might have 20 shirts, but I'd bet 4 of them are worn 80% of the time.
Guilty as charged.
The 80-20 principle is just this constant, subtle reminder that life is inherently selective and disproportionate. We are creatures of habit, and that habit concentrates value into a very small, vital core.
Okay, so we know this principle is everywhere. The key now is moving from just, acknowledging it exists to actively leveraging it for profit and efficiency.
And that requires a structured, quantitative approach. It's known as 80-20 analysis.
So what is that exactly?
80-20 analysis is essentially a rigorous measurement technique. It's designed to identify those nonlinear relationships between your inputs and your outputs. The methodology is straightforward but profound.
How does it work?
You gather data on causes and results, and you always rank the results in descending order of importance. The goal is to shine a massive spotlight on the heavy hitters, the powerful causes that yield the highest returns.
Let's revisit that analogy we touched on earlier, the slightly frivolous one with our 100 beer-drinking friends. How would the ranking work there?
Okay. So you'd measure their weekly consumption, and you'd rank them from the heaviest drinker, number 1, all the way down to the lightest, number 100. And what you would likely find is a very sharp drop-off.
Right.
We hypothesize that the top 20 friends, so 20% of the group, might consume 70% of the total beer. That gives you a 70-20 relationship.
And the immediate application is obvious. If a brewery or a market researcher wanted to understand beer consumption, they wouldn't waste time and money surveying all 100 people.
Of course not. They would focus their resources and their budget almost exclusively on those top 20 individuals. That's where the most valuable data is. That's where the most consumption leverage lies.
That focus on the heavy hitters is the core power of the analysis.
Absolutely. And conversely, the bottom 20% of your friends, they might consume a negligible 3% of the beer. That's the trivial money. And any effort spent trying to convince those people to drink more would just be wildly inefficient compared to focusing on your top tier.
Now let's apply this analytical rigor to a real business setting, like that case study you mentioned involving Electronic Instruments, Inc., or EII. They analyzed their product groups to find out where the true profitability was.
Right. So EI initially looked at its sales and found that a small segment, we'll call them product groups A, B, and C, accounted for 20% of total sales revenue.
Okay, so that's a 20-20 relationship. It sounds balanced, almost unremarkable.
Exactly. But when they looked at the profit generated by those groups, the numbers completely changed.
How so?
The reality was that those same three product groups, representing just 20% of the sales volume, were generating an astounding 53% of the total profit.
Wow. Okay, so already we see the imbalance, but the analysis got even deeper than that.
It did. They realized they needed to segment further. When they looked at the top product groups by profit, not just by sales, they found a 67-30 rule.
So 30% of their product sales accounted for almost 67% of the total profits.
Precisely.
This is where the implication for management becomes radical, isn't it? Most executives without this analysis would just focus on incremental improvements across all their products.
Right. A little bit here, a little bit there.
But the 80-20 analysis reveals that the best strategy is often zero-sum. You reallocate all your sales effort from the unprofitable 70% of the business to the highly profitable 30%.
That's the move. If EII successfully managed to double the sales of those top-performing groups A, B, and C, their total company revenue would only rise by maybe 20% to 30%.
Which sounds okay, but not amazing.
But because of the high margins and the efficiency of those specific groups, their overall company profits would surge by over 50%. This is a multiplying effect of focusing on the vital few.
And this same logic, which is even more powerful, applies to customer profitability. EII then analyzed its customer base, right?
They did. They categorized them by type and by value, and the finding was crystal clear. It was even more disproportionate than the product analysis.
What did they find?
They discovered an 800 and 825 rule. The most profitable 25% of their customers were yielding a massive 88% of the company's total profits.
Wait a second. 25% of customers are responsible for almost 90% of the profit. That means 3/4 of your customer base is barely contributing to the bottom line at all. That has to fundamentally change how you treat your best clients.
It has to. They also found that the single most profitable category, let's call them type A customers, accounted for only 15% of total revenue, but an immense 59% of the total profits.
So they're not even the biggest spenders, necessarily.
They're not necessarily. These high-value customers typically cost less to acquire, they require less administrative overhead, and they consistently purchase the products with the highest profit margins.
So the immediate, actionable takeaway for any business listening to this deep dive is non-negotiable. You must identify that top 20%, or 25% in this case, of clients, and dedicate the vast majority of your resources, your best service, and your deepest attention to them. They are the engine of your success.
And they will reward that focus with loyal, predictable, and high-margin revenue streams.
But this brings us to a crucial caution, though. Because the moment people learn the 80-20 principle, they often apply it too linearly.
Right.
Or then that can be disastrous.
Absolutely. The analysis is not a license to just go and cut 4/5 of your operations.
You gave the example of the book trade. It's a mathematical certainty that 20% of book titles comprise 80% of sales.
Right.
The linear thinking manager says, great, cut the other 80% of inventory and focus only on the chart toppers. But you're saying that fails. Why?
Because the 80% of titles you are tempted to cut often contain your core, reliable sellers. They might not be the latest media sensations, but they're the backlist titles that sell a predictable, reliable amount every single month, year after year, at very high fixed margins.
So they're the foundation.
They're the foundation. They represent the long tail of sales. If you eliminate them, you destroy the breadth of your offering, you alienate your niche customers, and often you destroy the very infrastructure that supports your best sellers. You have to ask, which 20%? Is it 20% of volume or 20% of profit?
That makes perfect sense. The linear approach just assumes the 80% is pure waste, but it can often be necessary context or just reliable filler.
Exactly.
And this leads us to the biggest managerial trap. The self-serving excuse for inaction.
Yes. When presented with the evidence that 4/5 of their business is barely profitable, or maybe even loss-making, managers will often defend the status quo. They'll protest that those marginal segments made a positive contribution to overheads.
And that sounds like a powerful financial argument on the surface. Why is it one of the most ineffective managerial excuses?
Because it fundamentally misunderstands cause and effect. The unprofitable business is only unprofitable because it requires those overheads in the first place.
Say more about that.
You need complex systems, layers of bureaucracy, specialized managers, custom logistics. All of that is needed to service the low-margin, high-complexity 80% of your business.
So the overhead is not some existing cost that needs to be covered by the marginal business. The marginal business creates the need for that overhead.
Precisely. Simple business is inherently efficient and beautiful. Complex business is ugly, expensive, and it destroys value for customers and for investors.
So why do managers love it?
Well, complexity is often beloved by managers because it creates stimulating jobs for them. It justifies layers of staff, expensive internal projects, even if it destroys overall value.
Right.
80/20 analysis gives you the clear, objective data you need to dismantle that complexity and eliminate the 4/5 of lethal overhead it sustains. The application of the 80/20 principle isn't limited to just slicing up customer segments. Recognizing the rule of the vital few is really the essential foundation for the global quality revolution that reshaped manufacturing between the 1950s and 1990s.
And it all cycles back to Joseph Juran. He formalized his ideas in his quality control handbook in the early 1950s, but American industry, which was, riding high on post-war dominance, they largely ignored his quest for quality.
They were complacent. It was Japan that embraced him. In 1953, Juran traveled there to lecture, and his vital few concepts became a cornerstone of their rapidly developing manufacturing strategy.
So instead of checking every single widget for every possible defect,
they focus on identifying the 20% sources of error that caused the most pervasive quality failures, the 80%. And this fundamental shift is what transformed the Japanese economy from being known for cheap, shoddy goods into the global powerhouse of high quality and productivity that we know today.
And this time-saving, efficiency-maximizing logic, it still dictates how products are developed today. It's often cited that decisions made early in the development lifecycle fix the majority of a product's costs.
Yes, specifically about 80% of a product's total life cycle costs are effectively locked in after only 20% of the development time has passed.
So finding the vital few design errors or architectural flaws during that initial 20% of the project, that's where all the leverage is.
It's everything. Fix it early and you save immense amounts of time and budget downstream.
Now, moving from manufacturing to the digital world, computing professionals were among the earliest and most impactful users of the 80/20 concept to maximize speed and efficiency.
The classic example is IBM in 1963. Their engineers discovered, through very detailed analysis, that 80% of a computer's time was spent executing only 20% of its massive operating code.
That's a stunning discovery. It just shows you exactly where all the processing friction is happening.
And that insight was pure gold because it showed them exactly where to focus their engineering talent. They didn't try to optimize the entire operating system.
That would have taken forever.
Right. They immediately rewrote and optimized that most used 20% of code, making it highly accessible and user-friendly. And this simple, selective application of the principle made their computers dramatically faster and more efficient for the majority of real-world applications compared to competitors who were, trying to optimize the whole 100%.
And we see that same principle applied to maximizing information power through radical selectivity in every subsequent generation of technology.
Absolutely. Think about the Apple Newton message pad. The engineers didn't try to cram an entire dictionary's worth of handwriting recognition into that small device.
Right.
They realized that by optimizing for just 0.01% of a person's total vocabulary, they could recognize and process 50% of the tasks you would actually want to perform. That's the selective genius of 80/20 thinking applied to information science.
Or look at the architecture of modern processors, like RISC processors, reduced instruction set computing.
RISC is a direct descendant of that IBM insight. It's based on the observation that most software spends 80% of its time executing only 20% of the available processing instructions.
So what did they do?
RISC architects designed processors to optimize the performance of that critical 20% while simplifying or just eliminating the unused 80%. This kept the chip size, cost, and power consumption down while maximizing the speed of the most common computing tasks.
So in any area of information, the key to power is ruthless selectivity.
It always is.
Now, we need to transition from the engineered world to the natural world, because the 80-20 principle, it steps out of the lab and it reveals its connection to fundamental science. Specifically chaos theory, and why systems tend toward a winner-take-all dynamic.
Chaos theory, far from describing, a random mess, actually describes predictable nonlinearity. The 80-20 pattern is simply a manifestation of that underlying logic.
And what's the mechanism driving that imbalance?
It's often a positive feedback loop.
Okay, explain that for us in accessible terms. What's a positive feedback loop doing here?
It just means that a small initial advantage, once it's established, naturally magnifies itself. It leads to huge, disproportionate consequences. The classic observation is the rich get richer.
Right.
They don't necessarily get richer just because they're 4 times smarter than the next person. They get richer because having that initial capital, the small advantage, creates opportunities and investment returns that inherently generate more capital. The huge consequence.
It's the compounding effect of success built on itself.
Precisely. Or take the goldfish analogy. If you start a group of fish that are all roughly the same size, the one that is even slightly larger initially gains an advantage. It has stronger propulsion, a slightly larger mouth.
So it gets more food.
It gets a disproportionate amount of food, which makes it grow larger, which allows it to capture even more food. The tiny initial difference yields a massive, unbalanced final result, an 80-20 relationship in survival and consumption.
This principle is also the science behind the tipping point concept, isn't it? We often think of progress as linear, where effort in equals results out. But that's rarely true in dynamic systems.
That's so true. If you're launching a new product or a new social habit, you often struggle initially. Lots of effort yields very little visible result. And this is where most pioneers give up.
But what does the 80-20 principle suggest?
It suggests that if you persist and you cross an invisible line, the tipping point, a very small amount of additional effort, can then reap enormous explosive returns. The behavior is inherently nonlinear. Small changes, if targeted correctly at that tipping point, can have macro effects.
And we see the ultimate expression of this in winner-take-all markets like entertainment. That box office study of 300 movies really drives home the extremity of this imbalance.
It's incredible. It showed just 4 movies. A staggering 1.3% of the total releases over that period earned 80% of all the box office revenue.
1.3%.
Yeah. That's essentially an 801 rule. It's not driven by some perfect quality metric. It's driven by positive feedback loops, word of mouth, social proof, consumer momentum, which means the results are highly unbalanced and almost random in their distribution.
Finally, we have to look at the societal implications. This isn't just about efficiency. It's about a deep, often uncomfortable truth regarding economic inequality. Despite massive efforts in the 20th century to redistribute wealth and level incomes, the 80-20 principle reveals that concentration of wealth just continues to relentlessly reassert itself.
And you can see it in the data. Consider the late 20th century in the U.S. From 1973 to 1995, all of the actual income gains went to the top 20% of earners.
All of them.
All of them. And within that 20%, a mind-boggling 64% of the total income increase went to just the top 1%. Today, you've got 5% of U.S. households owning about 75% of the household sector's equity.
That's a profound demonstration of the power law distribution in action on a global scale. It shows that systems naturally tend toward imbalance. Which means if we want to thrive personally, in a world where economic rewards are naturally concentrated, where 20% of people are capturing 80% of the value, we have to apply that same ruthless selectivity to our own effort.
And that's the necessary bridge to our next section, personal philosophy. That's the critical pivot. We've established the math, we've established the mechanisms. Now we move to 80-20 thinking.
This isn't just a technical skill, is it?
Not at all. It's a philosophical framework. The goal is no longer marginally better organization of your tasks. It's the radical organization of essential tasks and the ruthless elimination of the rest.
In other words, we're aiming to multiply our personal effectiveness dramatically. And this requires a complete mentality shift, one perhaps best encapsulated by the German general Erich von Manstein's famous categorization of the German officer corps during WWII.
It's highly instructional for career strategy. The von Manstein matrix categorized officers into 4 groups based on 2 axes, intelligence and diligence, and it determined their suitability for high office. It's a beautifully distilled piece of 80-20 thinking.
Okay, let's start at the bottom. The hardworking, stupid ones.
Von Manstein labeled them a menace. They create irrelevant work for everyone else through sheer bureaucratic energy.
His advice.
Fire them immediately.
Right. Then you have the intelligent, hardworking officers.
These are indispensable. They make excellent staff officers. They meticulously ensure every detail is considered and executed perfectly. They're the backbone of the organization.
But they're not the stars.
No. The ultimate stars, the ones best suited for the highest leadership, are the intelligent but lazy ones.
And that's the counterintuitive brilliance. Laziness here is not idleness, right?
Not at all. It's the strategic conservation of effort. The intelligent, lazy person instinctively seeks the shortest, most leveraged path to the desired result. They hate complexity and inefficiency because it forces them to work. Their entire goal is to identify the vital 20% of actions and deploy their effort only there.
So the ultimate ambition, then, is to simulate, manufacture, and deploy this lazy intelligence. It means understanding that earning more and working less is purely a function of selecting the right high-value activities and then doing only those things.
And to help you achieve this state, we can distill the findings of the 80-20 principle into a set of golden rules for success in this disproportionate world. The focus is heavily on specialization and leverage.
Okay, Rule 1. Radical specialization. Why is specialization so crucial in an 80-20 world?
Because a small business that tries to be a generalist will die. An individual who doesn't specialize is doomed to be an easily replaceable wage slave.
Because the results are concentrated.
And so the people who provide disproportionate value are those who are disproportionately skilled in a very specific niche. You must choose a niche you genuinely enjoy, where you can excel and where you stand a chance of becoming an acknowledged, sought-after leader.
And this has become easier than ever with the rise of the specialized creator economy. The internet enables hyper-specialization.
It allows someone in the top 20% of their niche, no matter how small, to serve customers globally and capture outsized value. Which leads directly to Rule 2, knowledge as power.
Meaning?
You have to recognize that 80% of crucial, high-leverage information is the property of only 20% of the people. These are often called the fortunate fifth or symbolic analysts. In your chosen specialized niche, you must know more than anybody else.
That sounds daunting, knowing more than anyone else. How do you achieve that without falling into that trap of hardworking stupidity?
It's not about consuming all knowledge. It's about consuming the vital 20% of knowledge within your specific area. You must not stop improving your expertise until you are sure you are demonstrably better or more knowledgeable in that small specialized niche than your peers.
And that level of expertise creates a natural moat against competition.
And justifies premium pricing.
Okay, Rule 3. Focus on the high-value customer. We saw this with EII's analysis. If you're a freelancer, a salesperson, or a CEO, you need to identify that 20% of clients or corporations who truly place the highest value on your specific specialized skill.
And you must then dedicate 80% of your effort, your attention, and your appreciation to them. The reason is reciprocity. When you serve your highest value clients relentlessly, you build alliances that lead to better referrals, higher margin work, and a more predictable, pleasant workload.
You're optimizing for happiness and profit at the same time.
Exactly.
Rule 4. Self-employment and maximum leverage. Now, this is a bold statement, but the principle suggests that highly effective, above-average employees are almost always underpaid relative to their peers. Why is that?
It's because an organization relies on an average compensation structure. If 80% of the value in any large organization comes from 20% of the professionals, that top 20% they're many times more effective than their average peer.
But they're rarely paid many times what their peers earn.
Never. The company captures the excess value they create. The only sure way to capture 100% of the value you create based on your specialized skill is to become self-employed or move into a highly leveraged commission-based structure as early as possible in your career.
So the 80-20 employee is basically subsidizing the 80% of lower value employees.
Precisely. And finally, Rule 5, radical outsourcing. Concentrate your limited time and energy on the 1/5 of activities at which you are the absolute best and outsource or eliminate everything else.
And this applies to personal life too, not just business.
Absolutely.
If your core skill is writing or coding, outsource things like invoicing, website maintenance, or even domestic duties like cleaning. If it's not a high-value activity for you, pay someone else whose high-value activity it is to do it.
These 5 rules drive us directly into the concept of the time revolution. The personal time hypothesis that comes from the 80-20 principle is stark. 80% of your valuable achievement is attained in only 20% of the time you spend working. The rest is largely filler.
So if we're only making good use of 20% of our time, that means we have this enormous untapped surplus we can reallocate.
Exactly. The goal isn't just marginally better time management. It's a transformation. You have to be ruthless.
To start this revolution, you have to conduct a personal activity audit and be brutally honest about the trivial many activities you need to eliminate. Let's list the classic low-value uses of time that just suck up energy and destroy productivity. First and foremost, things other people want you to do.
This is so critical. You have to learn to say no. Just because a task comes from a colleague, a committee, or even a mentor doesn't mean it's valuable to your core purpose. If it doesn't align with your 20% specialized goal, it's a distraction.
Second, things you're not unusually good at. If you're just average at graphic design but brilliant at pitching, outsource the design and spend that time pitching.
Third, things you don't enjoy. If you hate doing expense reports, even if they only take 20 minutes, they actually take up disproportionately more cognitive energy because of the dread they generate.
Find a way to automate or delegate it. And the most controversial one, answering the telephone. That's a very strong claim. Isn't there an argument that answering calls from key clients or the CEO is a high-value activity?
Only if it's scheduled and anticipated. The telephone, especially the constant stream of notifications and unscheduled calls, is a productivity killer. It allows others to interrupt your core 20% of focused, high-value time.
So what does lazy intelligence suggest?
It suggests you should structure communication so that you control when and how you engage. Let the CEO know you check your phone only at 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. Unless it's an absolute crisis, most issues can wait an hour or two.
Okay, now contrast that with the highest value uses of time, the vital few that we must multiply. What makes a task a 20% activity?
It's the things that check two boxes. They advance your overall purpose in life, and they involve leveraging your unique creativity or skill. Think about innovative ways of doing things that promise to slash time, like finding an automated process that cuts a 5-hour weekly task down to 30 minutes. That's pure 80-20 leverage.
And things other people tell you can't be done. That sense of challenge often unlocks creative solutions that yield disproportionate returns.
And of course, things that harness your own creativity. When you are using your specialized, unique skill in an uninterrupted flow state, that is almost certainly a 20% activity. The challenge is structuring your day to maximize that time.
And moving finally to the interpersonal realm, we have to apply the 80-20 principle to the most vital aspect of life, our relationships.
The hypothesis here, reinforced by anthropology and what's called the village theory, is simple. 80% of the genuine, emotional, or professional value of your relationships comes from 20% of them.
Anthropologists suggest we have a limited, almost fixed capacity for deep, important relationships. A few childhood friends, a few adult friends, maybe a handful of truly impactful professional allies.
Right. Once these slots are filled, they're often filled forever. They constitute an intellectual and emotional village.
So success demands quality over quantity.
Absolutely. Success requires allies, mentors, peers, and mentees. But you don't need hundreds of casual contacts. You need to identify the few key alliances who have the greatest ability to help you advance your purpose and offer genuine reciprocal support. Then you focus your finite attention on nurturing them.
It's about building a reciprocal core of trust and value. Don't waste energy on casual acquaintances or people who drain your time. Direct your energy, your enthusiasm, and your generosity toward the vital few who bring 80% of the value to your life. The 80-20 principle, when you take it literally, it can sound well, cold, ruthless, purely focused on corner cutting. If we eliminate 80% of complexity, are we eliminating 80% of life's flavor, its texture, its joy? This is the necessary nuance.
And this concern is valid. It speaks to what one critic framed as the yin and yang concern, the idea that we enjoy the 20% because we are released from the burden of the 80%.
Right. If every moment were optimized, life would become a high-pressure, joyless calculation.
The resolution, as I see it, lies in understanding that the principle operates across two distinct dimensions in our lives, and we have to apply different strategies to each.
Okay, what are the two dimensions?
Dimension one is efficiency. This is where the task is merely a means to an end. We're talking administration, low-value email triage, routine work, or earning a paycheck purely to fund your real life.
And in this dimension,
you should aim to be ruthless. Here, we apply the 20% approach. Our goal is to achieve 80% of the required result with the absolute minimum 20% of the effort. We should absolutely cut corners here.
Okay, that's dimension one. What's dimension two?
Dimension two is life-enhancing. This is where the task is hugely significant for its own sake. This includes your core relationships, deep learning, highly creative work, or hobbies that just fill your soul. Here, the goal is not efficiency. It's maximum depth and value.
So no corner cutting.
No. In the life-enhancing dimension, you take the longest, deepest, or highest possible route, the 200% approach. If you're learning a new skill purely for enjoyment, you should take your time, explore every tangent, and maximize the experience.
And if you are spending time with your most cherished allies, you should not be looking at your watch or seeking efficiency.
You seek maximum saturation of experience.
The synthesis is the trick then, and it's the definition of career success. Gradually shifting your job from being a necessity, an efficiency activity, to being a life-enhancing activity where your work literally becomes more fun than fun itself.
You do progressively less of the corner-cutting, low-value work and dramatically more of the deep, enriching, high-leverage work that utilizes your specialized 20% of skill.
This framework also helps us address the potential sustainability concern. If we focus too heavily on what works today, we risk destroying the potential for future success.
The classic example is the fishing industry. The largest harvests, the most productive waters, represent maybe 10% or 20% of the ocean's surface. If fishermen ruthlessly apply the 80-20 rule and only fish those areas without restraint,
They quickly face disaster.
total disaster, because those highly productive coastal waters often coincide with the most vital breeding and reproduction grounds.
So maximizing today's profit destroys tomorrow's source of value.
Exactly. A sensible use of the principle requires system thinking and a long-term restorative view. While today's analysis shows the top 20% of customers yield 80% of profit, you have to also look at the other 80% of marginal customers.
Why?
Because hidden within that marginal group might be a fast-growth company waiting to be cultivated, or a brand new segment that requires nurturing today to become tomorrow's 20%. We have to build in ethical and strategic restraints to ensure what is valuable today is sustainable tomorrow.
Ultimately, what the 80-20 principle reveals is a paradox that is enormously hopeful. Since the typical pattern shows that 80% of organizational or personal effort is effectively wasted, it means we are not locked into our current productivity.
There is massive untapped scope for improvement simply by reallocating resources from unproductive uses to productive ones. Progress, whether it's evolutionary, scientific, or personal, comes from refusing to accept the status quo.
It means we have the power to stop being victims of the trivial many and start identifying, cultivating, nurturing, and multiplying the few things that work fantastically well, the vital few.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just unpack this core realization. The central message of the 80-20 principle is a choice. You are either doomed to average, often stressful returns, but operating under that mathematically inaccurate 50-50 fallacy.
Or you can embrace the principle.
Right. Through radical selectivity, specialization in your most enjoyable niche, and leveraging your time and your alliances to achieve a multiplying effect on your life.
And you have to remember that the person who brings about progress is rarely the conformist, as the writer George Bernard Shaw observed. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself.
Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man.
Exactly.
And the 80-20 principle is the intellectual and analytical framework that allows us to become that unreasonable person. It helps us look at the world, notice the 80% of waste and inefficiency hiding beneath the surface, and refuse to tolerate it.
Forget the 80% time sinks. Focus only on maximizing the quality of the 20% that counts.
So here is the final provocative thought for you to chew on this week, informed by that necessity of selective, lazy intelligence.
Since success always comes from a small minority of effort, what seemingly unreasonable high-value activity, something you truly excel at and enjoy, but have been neglecting due to the demands of the trivial many?
Like that pile of emails or that unnecessary committee meeting.
What is that one thing you will prioritize this week to radically shift your own personal 80-20 ratio?